It's been a tumultuous month on world markets. It's been a tumultuous month for South Africa. But in the last couple of days, we've seen Tito Mboweni, the finance minister, who's been strangely absent from social media since the days of posting recipes, come up with a recipe for economic success for South Africa. So much so that even some opposition parties have given the thumbs up of support to a new plan which has been put into the public domain. Joining me, Patrick Mathidi from Aluwani Capital Partners and Paul Theron from Vestact. We'll talk about that and also talk about some of the big stories affecting companies and economies and markets around the globe in the next 25 minutes or so. Patrick Mathidi, give me a sense of Tito's economic blueprint. I think the politics of it's more interesting than the economics of it because there's no earth-shattering news in it, but it is a very calculated, calm, measured assessment of where we're going wrong and what we need to do to fix it.
Look, absolutely, Bruce. I think for the first time we're seeing a more pragmatic plan with very concrete steps in terms of what needs to be done, but also with timelines and implications of what it means from a GDP point of view if we get some of those things right. So this is for the first time ever, in my view, where we have that sense over and above just what we've seen in the past, where it's been a laundry list of things that need to be done with no real commitment, no real buy-in. To some extent that, some political parties in the past have actually called some of these things like, pipe dreams because there's been no concrete plans and no even, implementation. So I think the next few things to watch out for will be one, the buy-in within the political space, because in the past that has always been, one of the stumbling blocks. If you look at the ANC with all the various parties within it, you do get some friction in terms of implementation. But over and above that, we do need, though, to get, into the first gear and actually start implementing and get going.
We've had the first gear, that was about 20 years ago, and that didn't turn out very well. Maybe this is second gear. Paul Theron, the interesting politics of this is this was meant to be presented at a cabinet meeting next week, but what Tito Mboweni has done is by putting it into the public domain, putting it onto the Treasury website, putting it in everybody's hands, is he's taking control of the messaging of this. There's no time for leaks, there's no time for undermining a document nobody has seen. It is Tito Mboweni putting himself front and center as being an architect of change for this economy.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I'm not all that excited by the South African government and its repeated plans. We've seen this sort of thing. We are very good at policy in this country, terrible at implementation. All those government ministries that we know are working on things like home affairs, visas, not seeing the progress we want. Public enterprises, Eskom, not seeing the progress that we want. Health, working on mad castles in the sky like the NHI. I suppose this is a bit of a fight back from Treasury, which is saying, well, the outlook doesn't look that great. But I'd be happier if the Treasury was working to strengthen SARS, to
all of that stuff's happening
put
in the background,
messages
though.
out about cuts of expenditure because the cupboard is empty.
That is in the public domain as well. Tito Mboweni has already told government ministers that when it comes to the medium-term budget policy statement, on average, budgets this year are being cut 6%, and there'll be further cuts next year and the year after. That messaging is out there, Paul. It is one. It's a very clear sense that this is, when old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard was bare, and in this case, it's
because we're approaching the philosophical Laffer curve in this country. In other words, we've reached the point where, despite what Treasury does, they're not going to collect any more money because the economy is not growing, so VAT collections are not growing, companies are doing poorly, so income taxes are low, and individuals are doing, on aggregate, poorly because lots of people are losing their jobs and, people are scratching around and so on and so forth. So I have this concern that the policy vacuum is creating an environment where people like to come up with good ideas for how we're going to change things, but the economics of our reality are not good.
Patrick Mathidi, you seem to suggest, though, that this is more than just a pipe dream of filling a policy vacuum. This is the policy basis we need to create the new base on which to grow. Something's got to give and something's got to break, and this is what's happening.
Look, Bruce, I think for me, if we can actually implement half the things that are in that document, I think we'll be 10 times better than where we're at currently. So I agree with Paul. The biggest challenge we've had in this country is implementation and accountability. So we need to actually start moving towards that direction. What this policy does for me is actually start to say, guys, one, we need to acknowledge our issues and our weaknesses, and those are well documented, right? right?
And spelled out in the 77-page document,
Absolutely.
too.
And over and above then becomes, well, we cannot just sit and say, well, there's not much we can do. We need to start somewhere. And I think for me, this is the start. If we can then actually get started and get cracking and make sure that there's accountability, people are held to account in terms of delivery, I think in a few years' time we'll look back and say, actually, that was a good move and great that we actually started somewhere.
What I like about the document is that it's very clear. Visas, this is what needs to happen, and it's handing the responsibility to the minister in charge. And it's being done ahead of a cabinet meeting, and it's being done, no doubt, with presidential support, because Tito Mboweni is not going to fly without high-level cover on this thing, because he runs the risk of exposing himself to elements within his own party who are not going to like what they see in this document.
Over and above that, Bruce, what it does, again, which is for me the first time ever, it says if you can do A, B, C, D within this time frame, this is what it means from a GDP point of view.
He's working towards 4% growth.
Absolutely. So at least there is some thought behind it. So it's not just a thumbs like that says, well, we need 6% growth to actually keep
a 14-point plan, a 12-point plan.
Exactly. There is something behind it,
yeah.
Some thought and some logic, hopefully, which if you can just implement, I think we can make great progress in this country.
Because we do. We need a plan and we need implementation. There's no arguing about that. Paul has been quite controversial in recent weeks, and he's issued a video online which has had 10 times as many views as his videos usually get. And one of the issues that you are concerned about is in a policy environment like South Africa, where we're looking for certainty, and the Department of Health comes out with NHI, for example. You've been massively outspoken about that. We've also seen big pushback from the Minerals Council on the mining charter, for example, in the past month or so. There is a discussion, though, that is happening, Paul, and I think even you should acknowledge this, on a grown-up level, on an informed level. You might not like the thinking that goes into the policy formulation, but for the first time in nearly a decade, we are having the right discussions about the right issues, or not?
I think it's important to acknowledge ideology in these conversations. There are people who grew up believing that the state is the solution to all of our problems. So their mindset is that if the state was just to do this, if the state just had a couple of additional good cadres, if we were able to follow our plan or our process, we can imagine any wonderful outcome for ourselves and the state can implement it. But here's a revolutionary thought. What if the state's efforts to change things actually made things worse? I don't want to sound like Debbie Downer here, but there is a strong argument to be made for us doing less. So just put on your pants before you put on your shoes. Just get out of bed every morning
fair enough.
and do what you're supposed to do. Don't dream of new things. Don't imagine that you're going to revolutionize Eskom. Just make sure that you don't, break all of the equipment, that you get the coal in the right place, etc., etc., etc. I'm using those as examples.
We don't do the basics particularly well, and people were very critical of the president in his State of the Nation address talking about bullet trains and smart cities when you've got dysfunctional inner cities and metro rails that don't work. I'm a big believer in dreams. Dreams are good, but at the same time, you do need to do the practical stuff. In this document, though, it does talk about public-private partnerships. It does talk about cooperation with the business sector. The stuff that Paul is concerned about is in the document there, Patrick. I mean, it's there. Whether it is ever enacted or acted upon is another story.
Absolutely, but I guess just to give Paul some comfort, if you think how we got here, it's the very same state, right, that got us here. So in a way, it is accountable. So they need to be seen to be doing something. They can't then step back and say, well, private sector and everyone else, please giddy up and help us through this. And for me, this document actually starts to lay that basic foundation to say we need to create an enabling environment to enable other stakeholders, be it private business, be it outside investors, who can come in. Because we've messed up so much that we've created this element of uncertainty such that even our own people don't even believe in us. So you need to be seen to be doing something. And for me, this actually starts to create that environment which is enabling. Then after, once you've got your basics right, which is we need to move from the broken to the basic, then yes, there is an argument for stepping back and say, well, actually, private sector, let you run with things. But I don't think at this point we can afford a government that is passive, that is just sitting back and saying, well, we're just there let's see how this whole thing unfolds. Sorry, it was not me, it was the previous guy, and let's see how it goes. I don't think we can afford it as a country.
The most powerful part of the document is an acknowledgement right up front. First line in the document is we've got an unsustainable economy. It's not working. We need to create jobs. It's a very clear and realistic 77 pages, 11 of which are references to other research papers and projects and all sorts of stuff. This work has been done over the last 8 or 9 months or so, and it is a document that is up for public discussion, and it's available on the National Treasury website, so you can download it, have a look at it, and send the tips for Tito, literally, to the finance minister in order to get your 5 cents worth in. Whether or not you believe anything will ever come of it, of course, is another issue altogether. We'll talk about companies. We're going to talk about markets. There's been an almighty fight, of course, between Old Mutual and its chief executive, or former chief executive, Peter Moyo, who's been fired not once but twice, and is going to court in order to fight these battles. We've also seen other big announcements from large South African companies, big pressure coming to bear on the global economy, trade under pressure once again. Picking up on that in just a moment.